Remember Mercedes-Benz in Mario Kart? Yeah, rather strange crossover, wasn't it? Almost overnight, the beloved kart racer went from over-the-top party game to a less than stellar commercial for German Personenkraftwagen. Quite the contrast to earlier titles in the series, and not something particularly liked by its fanbase, it seems. People of all ages have an innocent, childlike relationship with Mario, and the Mercedes deal broke the illusion of purity that Nintendo had once had. The whole thing stank of a desperate money-making decision because it was. Okay, that sounds a bit pretentious, but I get the point. The fantasy festivities of the Mushroom Kingdom will forever be interrupted by an unpleasant car advertisement. Yet, these three tossers weren't the first silver arrows to appear in the Mario Kart series, sort of. Just as we did with its first Grand Prix car in the franchise, we have to go all the way back to Mario Kart DS. Nintendo would introduce numerous real cars for the 2005 handheld port. Not just Mario and his cigarette-shaped pseudo-Honda would feature, but tanks, starships, vacuum cleaners, and a cucumber with wheels. Yes, this green goblin of a go-kart isn't just a mid-tier arcade vehicle, this is allegedly based on the W125. Back in the 1930s, racing wasn't what we'd call a particularly professional affair. Different car manufacturers and hobbyists would carry their prototypes to different Grand Prix events all over the world. A world championship was nowhere to be found for most of the decade, yet that didn't diminish the public's appetite for the adventures of the day. Enter these pigs and their attempts to piss on everything of beauty and civility. See, the mustachioed megalomaniac in the middle wasn't just an anti-Semite, a failed art student, a nonce, and a war enthusiast, but a huge fan of Automobilrennsport. The world of dangerous wheel-to-wheel competition seemed to be the perfect place to position fascism as the world's leading ideology. Some things do never change now, do they? Funnily enough, according to this book, Adolfin here essentially copied what companies under this Italian fascismo had already put into practice years ago. This means that right after the Nazis took over in 1933, Mercedes-Benz received a bit of a financial boost to produce expensive, advanced racing machinery. German cars weren't really front-running at the time, just look at Avis that same year. The plan for crushing of the opposition worked, seeing as many competitors wouldn't have come close to the budget available to German manufacturers at the time. The same thing goes for the Auto Union, better known nowadays as the 2026 Formula One entrant that is Audi. Motorsport was anything but the expensive science we know it as today, though ever since the birth of Grand Prix, car manufacturers had tried to test their might. Mercedes-Benz had chucked a whole new level of investment into racing. Add to that the continuous income thanks to the ramping up of the homeland war machine, which both companies were heavily involved in. You think we can just build cars? Look at all of our planes! Race events in the Third Reich were well attended. Very well. So Germans. Race events in the Third Reich were well attended and therefore provided another source of income for the fascist formula outfits. Names of popular racing drivers would sing through the streets of the Reich right up until dust and rubble would fill the streets only a few years after this. Even now, the Silver Arrows are highly revered amongst car enthusiasts or sim racing folks. Probably not the best timing to do so, considering the continuous rise of fascism in Europe, and it's not as if this type of adulation and attention wasn't calculated by the Nazi regime. It boils down to make-believe, smoke and mirrors, ensuring one's legacy as being perceived as superior, uber, technologically light years ahead of common folk, despite that obviously being BS. No, Patrick, the Nazis didn't have a secret moon base. They didn't choose to hide in the Arctic ice either. I think Quentin Reviews puts it best in his video series about the History Channel.
If the Nazis really were geniuses of conflict, if they had technology beyond our wildest understanding, if their skulls swelled constantly to maintain their massively expanding brains, they would have won the war.
That didn't stop good old modern Merc from putting Bottas or Hamilton in these pre-war pieces of racing history. So maybe next time you better think twice about babbling a love letter to fascist boxes out on the internet. To be fair, some wikis solely refer to this as a 1930s Grand Prix car, not specifying it to be a Mercedes-Benz. Yet their dominance in late 30s motorsport makes it a very likely inspiration. Comparing the two side by side, it's very easy to see. Arguably, it's closer than the B-Dasher is to the RA272. The only thing missing to the puzzle is these two sausage-looking exhausts. I suppose they were a stylistic choice, possibly inspired by later Grand Prix vehicles, as well as making the car look more like a fantasy vehicle than a real-life racing machine. Mario Kart Wii and Mario Kart 7 would go on without adding another pseudo Silver Arrow to the game. Instead, the Cucumber would go on to appear once again, even if mildly adjusted for the Nintendo Wii, and looking both more and less like an old F1 car. In fact, it kinda looks like this Formula 2 car I recently stumbled upon. Yes, dear children, this is what F2 used to look like, including fighter pilot grandpa in the cockpit. And then, for Mario Kart 8 on the Nintendo Wii U, Mercedes truly arrived. 3 cars were to make their official arcade gaming debut. Bizarrely enough, it's not the brand itself that sticks out, despite the fact that it does stick out to an extent. Luigi would race as a true Silver Arrow in the trailers, and it didn't look that much out of place. Then there were these two tossers. One of them, an old Mercedes-Benz sports car, the other a forgettable SUV-type vehicle, which will always look out of place to me. It's these two cars that irk me the most, not just as commercial vehicles. Visually speaking, they flop. They don't work. It doesn't look as though Mario and the gang are actually racing Mercedes-Benz brutes around the various Nintendo locations. They look like cheap imitations, awful rental cars you'd find at your local kart track, or worse, some indoor expedition at the mall. The Silver Arrow seems to stand the test of time by comparison. It's a bit much in terms of branding, but stylistically speaking, it works as well as the Cucumber or its successor. I genuinely wonder why Merc didn't just go for 3 race cars instead. It's not as if they don't have enough of them kicking about. Some of them might not even reek of fascism as much. They'd be a much better fit in the Mario Kart universe. Another option could have been to increase the size of the sports car, for example. Mario Kart did take inspiration from similar cars in the past and seemed to nail the proportions in those cases, but did the collaboration actually pay off for anybody? Nintendo were quick to include the DLC in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Switch, so they weren't too embarrassed with the story. But what about Merc? If articles are to be believed, the sponsorship deal seems to have paid off, bizarrely enough. In fact, it went so incredibly well, some other brands considered some involvement in the franchise as well. Oh, look, it's fascism again. How convenient. The interest in Mercedes cars was set to have risen right after the Mario Kart announcement. Furthermore, the brand would be able to build an entire series of commercials around Super Mario himself. Japanese car sellers were said to be especially happy with the campaign. Back at that time, Nintendo wasn't doing particularly well. Remember, this is right in the midst of Wii U madness, the end of Nintendo, all that fun jazz. So it's more than understandable they'd have to try and look for other forms of income. Mercedes would continue the partnership with content in Super Mario Maker a short while after, furthering the fruitful bonds with Nintendo. Those that happen to be swayed into buying a luxurious lunchbox of a motor car are probably never going to roam my streets. As for the future of Mario Kart, there is no news on whether the manufacturer would return for the next installment. All signs point towards some form of change for the upcoming sequel. Maybe this time another megalomaniac will get his wish. Or maybe we can leave the age of real cars in the fake Mushroom Kingdom behind us. The purity mentioned, however, that we shall burn to the ground as well.